I do got a lot of material to cover. The slides are going to be made available. So what I would say is to try and write everything down is probably not a good idea. What probably would be a good idea is, and all of you are going to have access to the absentee owner profits. So what's probably a good idea is just to really focus on understanding the concepts and just really just a broad stroke kind of understanding of everything I'm going to be talking about. Because then you're going to be able to go back home and be able to go through the system again one more time in a lot of detail. Okay. Keys to success with my system. I'm going to talk about some ways to get started, get going pretty fast. Expectation for results, and Mike talked a little bit about this, and that's one of the biggest problems I see with people that get involved, is that their expectations are not really reality-based. And so we're going to be discussing that a little bit. And really just also at the tail end of the presentation, you're just going to talk about a couple mindset things that I think are important for you to be successful, not only if you use my system or just to be a successful real estate investor. A few tips. Like I said, don't try to write everything down. Everything is going to be in the system. A lot of the stuff I'm going to cover is just going to be a brief explanation because when you get back home and you use the system, there's a lot of video tutorials, and obviously I can't really go over video tutorials here, but it covers that in a very much detail. And also, too, a very important thing, the learning is going to come from the doing. A lot of times with anything, some of the bigger insights you're going to get about what you do, some of these techniques, whether it be the internet bandit signs or the absentee owner profits, is you're going to learn these things actually by doing them and going through. Sending out direct mail, but really couldn't send out too much direct mail. Just a couple pieces here or there. Just really didn't have the money to do it. And so I always say my Oscar thank you speech is going to be for the Discover card. Because what ended up happening is that I didn't have any money, and I got a Discover card in the mail with a balance $8,000. At first I thought, well, why? This must be a mistake. Nobody, I got a credit card with $8,000 because my credit really wasn't that great back then because I didn't have any money, couldn't pay my bills. So I got a credit card for Discover, and so the previous year I had done about 13,000 pieces of mail, and I said, well, I did this direct mail and it worked, and I got deals from it, but I didn't get enough deals. So I said, well, what if I took what I mailed the entire year last year and just mailed it in 1 month? And my thought, well, if I got X number of deals from that, then I would just accelerate the process. I would now get those same number of deals within that same period of time, within the month. And so really, in 2 years, I mailed out over 500,000 postcards. So don't let that number seem intimidating. You don't have to go out and mail 500,000 postcards. And I'm going to go over those numbers, but just to give you an idea, that's kind of also the neat thing about this model and using direct mail is that it is scalable, meaning that you can start off and then scale it up, where a lot of the lead sources, like for example, when you talk about free foreclosures, the list is somewhat finite. You're not going to be able, there's only a certain number of names available, whereas with this, you can scale it and do more. And these were assignment fees. This is not like I flipped 14 properties that were worth $100,000 each, and so that's how I got that number. Those were actual assignment fees that were generated from those deals. So, and Mike talked about this. I'm going to talk about this a little bit. And what is a business model? Business model is a group of synergistic processes that work together with the goal of creating a net income. And so my question to you is, what's your business model? And I'm going to talk about one business model, which is lead generation. And everything you do should be centered around developing a system and a model with processes in place so that it could also become automated to the extent that you don't have to be involved in all the individual pieces of it. And again, a business model incorporates systems and automation. An example, bandit signs. Bandit signs in and of itself is not a business model. In other words, you going out and putting up bandit signs every so often, that's not really a business model. Business model would say you take that and you create a system that automates the process of the signs being placed out by people out in the street and you generating the leads on a consistent basis. That would be the equivalent of creating a system around that. So you have to think about your business in those terms. Now, Edward Deming, quote from him, if you can't describe what you're doing as a process, that you don't know what you're doing. And so everything you do should be a systematic process. And so my advice is also learn to think of things learn to think in terms of systems. Create and run the system, and I call it, you really should be in your business what they call that instrument rated. Like people that fly a plane, I don't know if anybody's a pilot here, but if you fly a plane, you're eventually going to get instrument rated, where you could fly the plane without ever visually seeing anything. You're just working off of the instruments. And your business really should be run that way, where you make decisions, what I call data-driven decisions, where you're making decisions based on the data that you're looking at from your business, not on some emotional estimation or some hunch that you have about what things will work and what won't work. And again, as with any system, you expect unintended results. Not everything works the way it should be the first time. A lot of times things don't work out. And the problem is that a lot of times people expect that everything's going to work right the first time. When it doesn't, it deflates your enthusiasm for that, even though if over time you could make it work, and you just kind of let it go. Whereas if you can continue to stick with it, it would have worked. And also, too, when you want to change your result, go work on the system, not the symptom. I'm going to go over that a little bit more. Focus on what's working and develop it, and search for bottlenecks or constraints. I can't go over that in too much detail, but in every business, you're always looking for that constraint. The constraint is just a bottleneck, that if you were to release that bottleneck, it's going to increase. For example, an example would be, let's suppose that you had I'm going to use a number of 1,000 leads a day coming in through your business. And let's suppose you have 100 leads a day coming in, and you could create a system that could funnel 200 leads. But if you're the only one that's doing that, you're the only one that's actually handling those leads, and you're actually the constraint for that business. And so you need to always focus on what are the constraints in your business in order to be able to get those removed so you can go ahead and continue to grow it. And again, I'm talking fast. A lot of this, we're going to give you the slides. We're going to make them available. I do have 144 of them. So a couple quick things. Speed of implementation. My biggest successes, and with a lot of the students that we see, is with regards to what's called speed of implementation. And it's really one of the things you find among most successful people. You don't have to get it right, you just have to get it going, and that's what Mike Collins talked about this morning. And some of the most, and remember the 80-20 rule. In other words, whenever you're looking at anything, and I'm going to go over this in detail just in the next couple of slides because I think it's that important, is that you got to look at everything you do, and you got to understand that 80% of your results come from 20% of your efforts, and that applies to everything. I mean, even to the extent of friends. That 20% of your friends give you 80% of your pleasure. The rest of them, not that I want you to go out and fire all your friends, but it's a reality if you really think about it. And so, also accept the fact that you're going to screw up. A lot of times people get stuck. They got hung up because they don't want to make a mistake. And granted, I've made mistakes. I've made mistakes that have cost me a couple $1,000s here or there. And so you have to mitigate your risk, but you also can't be afraid of making a mistake. And I think a lot of times, in my experience, and what I've been able to do with direct mail, a lot of the insights and a lot of the things I've learned came from mistake, came from doing things wrong. So there's this thing called the 80% solution. I didn't think of this. It's actually a guy by the name of Dan Sullivan, who's a coach, a mentor for business people. And he talks about the fact that the first attempt at anything is, anything you do is 80% good enough, regardless of preparation. So what does that mean? That means that a lot of times we tend to not do things because we want them to be perfect. So many times you'll take a project and you'll say, you know what, I can't get it done this week. I need another week or another 2 weeks to get it done. At the end of those 2 weeks, you still don't think it's perfect. It's never going to be perfect. And so you have to understand that if you put a good enough effort into it, your first attempt is going to be good enough. It's probably going to be most people's 100%. And so always remember that. The other part of it is that, again, engagement, doing the thing, like Mike Collins' course, Internet Bandit Signs. Just, the actual doing of those tasks, the actual doing of the task of doing the direct mail, those are where you're going to get your insights. That's where you're really going to learn and go through those mistakes as I did. And again, recognize that 80% is good enough in 80% of the situations. And again, a lot of times, what we do immediately always turns out to be the best. In other words, there's a point of diminishing returns. If you have a project, you spent 2 days on it, the first 2 days are always going to be the most productive. After that, if it takes you another 2 weeks to finish it off, it's really not going to have that much of a dramatic impact on what you're doing anyway. And again, life requires an 80% result in 80% of the situations. Everybody says, yeah, I want to give it 110%. I say give it 80%, and a lot of times you'll probably end up getting further a lot more than everybody else, because everybody who's trying to get to 110%, they're just not going to do anything because they're waiting to get to 110%. It's never going to come. And again, just recognize that whenever you're implementing any of these strategies, such as my direct mail or Mike's internet bandit signs or anything else, just get to that 80%, get to that first 80%, get it going, get it implemented, and then you can work on either continuing to refine it, or a best case scenario is you get somebody else to finish the other 20% that you didn't get to. And again, just spending the time where it counts. I give this example. How many times have you fiddled around with a postcard with a font on it? You finish the postcard in 30 minutes, but yet you spent 2 hours waiting, messing around with it and hoping that the font just looks just perfect. Well, that's what I'm talking about. That's exactly the same thing that's going to hold you back, because you do it there. And I have a saying that I heard from Harv Eckert, how you do anything is how you do everything. So you got to always think about the fact that if these things, even though they're on a very small particular task, the way you approach things will carry over to a lot of other things that you do in your life, and so you have to be attentive to that. So getting out of the gate fast is just getting 80% as done as quickly as possible. Understand that whether you take 2 days or 2 weeks, you're always going to feel that it's just not perfect, and it's just a battle that can never be won. It's just the key thing is to focus on the most important parts and get them done, and then also build momentum. There's nothing like the momentum that you're going to get if you go home and all this stuff just sits, at the house for 2 weeks. You're dead almost, because to get back the momentum, to get going, to get those things moving. And so you got to try, as soon as you get home, just start to build that momentum. And I'm going to also go over some strategies also at the very tail end of the presentation. But you got to build momentum by, as soon as you get home, start implementing. Even if it's just 1 or 2 very small things, but get that going. So I'm going to talk about absentee owner marketing. Now, absentee owner, everybody knows absentee owner is somebody who doesn't live at the property, owns the property as a rental property. Now, a lot of times, though, people confuse it and say that, absentee owner is only someone that lives out of state. Oddly enough, most of the properties that we buy and we bought in the past come from absentee owners that are local within that area. They usually live within 30 minutes, 45 minutes. And so a mistake people make is that they say, well, I'm only going to target those people that are out of state. That's not the case. You have to target everybody as an absentee owner, specifically those people that live around the area. And so many of the deals come from people living in the area, 30 minutes to an hour. And so the other times is they could be an accidental landlord. In other words, a lot of times they've inherited the property. And what we find a lot of times is somebody inherits the property, they decide they want to be a landlord. And they just are a landlord now for 10 years, and little by little the agony of it just continues to build, and one day they decide they want to sell the house. And a lot of times that's where the best deals come from. Many times there's tenants living there. A lot of times they're family members. And I'm going to show you some of the marketing pieces and some of the verbiage we put into those marketing pieces. But as Mike Collins said, his best deals are from people that are not wanting the family members to move out. And so the other thing is you got to be attentive to that situation. The customer is saying, I don't want to deal with my cousin who's been living at the property, and how do I get him out? So you have to be able to effectively communicate with them and work that out with them so that you can go ahead and get the deal. I'm going to go over that actually when we go over some of the marketing pieces. And so let's talk about direct mail now. Why is it that I like direct mail? Number one is direct mail is predictable. You could very, very much with very precise predictability know that if you want 100 sellers calling you next week, that you could estimate how many marketing pieces you need to send out and have 100 seller calls the following week. It's just really that simple. So again, you can control also when the calls come in. Direct mail, for example, if you're putting out bandit signs, you're going to get calls all throughout the week, the weekend, whenever they decide to call. With direct mail, generally what we do is we drop the mail on a Thursday or Friday or maybe on a Saturday. By the time it hits, it's usually a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We take the calls at the beginning of the week. By the time the end of the week rolls around, Thursday, Friday, they started to die down. Come Saturday or Sunday, I don't have the the responsibility, or at least feel bad that there's a ton of people calling, but yet I want to spend time with my family, want to spend time taking off. And so that's one of the other things about direct mail, is that you can control when those calls come in. And also, too, direct mail positions you as the expert in any sort of marketing position. And that's what the position that you want, is that the customer goes through a series of events that sifts and sorts that person. So by the time they eventually get to you, they're already qualified. They're already pre-qualified. They know exactly what you do. They know exactly the benefits of working with you. And then at that point, it's just a very simple conversation, as Mike mentioned, just to sort and sift and figure out who's going to be a deal, who's not. Now, and again, you want them to be calling you, not you calling. The other thing is, I don't like to kiss anybody's butt. I remember when I first started the business, but it's true. When I first started the business, I was dealing with brokers. I'm a realtor, okay? But it was a pain because you had to kiss their butt. If you have a relationship with an agent and they're feeding you deals, and every single month they're feeding you 1 or 2 deals and you're making money from it, if they're if they're just a pain in the butt, if they're just a pain in the butt and you don't like to deal with them, you got to take their crap. Why? Because they're a source of your income. And I hated that. Some of these guys I was talking with, I just wanted to strangle them. But with a direct mail, when you're dealing with a private owner, guess what? If you have 100 calls waiting on your voicemail and a guy's just a pain in the butt, he's rude, obnoxious, you just say, you know what, I don't have to deal with this. You hang up, you got another, whatever number of people you have left that you have to call. And so that's another reason why I like direct mail. And again, if they're rude, you can hang up. And unlike dealing with REO brokers or realtors, you don't have to take their BS. And I'm a realtor, so anybody who's a realtor, I'm not saying anything about a realtor. And also, too, you can control the fire hydrant with direct mail. If I'm going on vacation, if I'm going to be traveling, if I want to take a week off or whatever the case is, I cannot drop any mail that week, and thus I'm not going to have any calls to make. Whereas if you have other types of marketing out there, perhaps you have to continue. You're going to be continually getting leads, and I'm not saying you don't want that to happen, but you also have to have a system in place to be able to handle those leads when you're not there. So the other part of it is just, if you think about it, with everything about foreclosures, people, you see the full page ads. Everybody's pitching the foreclosure seminars. It seems like everybody's forgotten about absentee owners. Most foreclosures get about 100 plus letters a week. I started at one point, every 6 months to 8 months, I get the bug about foreclosures, because you see enough of these things, you see enough of the ads, you're like, maybe I should try it again. And I went to this guy's house, and he told me that the first day he got his mail delivered, it was in a plastic corrugated bin because they couldn't fit it into the mailbox. Okay? So I don't know about you, but I don't want to deal with that kind of competition. That makes it a little bit tough. He was kind enough actually to let us go into his garbage in order to get all the letters and postcards, which is a pretty decent, interesting education. But it's just a lot of competition.
Why did he call you?
Huh? I have no idea. I was just happy that with that competition, I have no idea. I don't know the reason why he called. It wasn't even a deal, but I went just because I wanted to see what it was like and what was going on. And it really that was the beginning and the end of my. So every 8 months, I decide, let me do it, and then I get a re-education that it's just not something I want to do. And everybody's on the foreclosure gravy train. So. Also, too, most investors don't know how to do it effectively, market to absentee owners. A lot of times they do 1 or 2 mail-outs, they fizzle out, they don't do it again. The other part of it is many times when we're dealing with an absentee owner, we're dealing with them one-on-one. There's no competing. Very rarely do we have a situation where the owner will say, hey, I have another investor that made me an offer. Most investors don't know how to market effectively to absentee owners. So I'm going to talk to you about when to mail, what to send them. Just the whole process. I'm going to cover it in detail. And also, too, they're easier deals. You don't have to worry about a short sale. Paperwork is simpler. As we're talking about here, we're talking about signing contracts. All we need is 2 documents, a contract and an assignment of contract. That's it. We don't need to be worried about having a deed signed and getting a notary and all that other stuff. It just sounds, that's part of the reason why I don't like foreclosure. Just it's too complicated. And again, most of the time we're dealing with these guys one-on-one. So, and I always ask people this, what if I told you I had a list of all the people that were thinking of selling the property, needed repairs, and they owned the property for such a long time that they had a ton of equity, and that's what absentee owners are. Another subset now of absentee owners is what we call free and clear owners. Now, free and clear owners, it's identically the same thing as absentee owners, except that they're actually living at the property. So what we're talking about is we're talking about somebody who is living at their home, has been living there for 30, 40, 50 plus years. And again, best if they've been living there for 20 years or more. It's the same criteria of the absentee owners, and I'm going to cover that in a second. A lot of times we find a lot of probate deals. The interesting thing is that when we do free and clear owners, the probate deals we find are just completely untouched. In other words, they haven't even filed a probate case. Nobody even knows about them. A lot of times we put them on the contract, we get them in touch with an attorney, they actually start the probate case, and before any other investor knows about it, we already have it on the contract. And a lot of times, because you're developing that relationship right up front, in the beginning, you become kind of their trusted advisor to take them through the whole process step by step. And a lot of these deals are the ones we've made the most money. And a lot of these guys hardly ever get any mail from investors. Now, the only negative with free and clear owners is you have to hit more of them. In other words, to get the same number of people to call, you have to actually send more mail. But the quality of the leads is actually much better, because by the time they go through the process I'm going to show you, the calls are just much more qualified. Now, I'm going to cover a couple of things. So, let's say that you want to do a research, you want to do a marketing, an absentee owner campaign in a particular area. So, in my area, say South Florida, Dade County, a lot of zip codes, high density, get about probably 40, 50,000 absentee owners. If I divide the county into half, it's probably 20, 25,000 north side, south side. So how do you determine what are the best zip codes? How do you determine which ones out of all those? Because when I was doing it, I was taking all 20,000. Why? Because I was doing a lot of volume. But if you're just starting out, so how do you pick and choose which ones you want to focus on initially? So, a couple ways to do it. I'm going to give you the low-cost way to do it, and then one that you're going to have to spend a little bit of money to buy a list, but it's certainly the most accurate. The low cost is actually going through a few websites. And what the websites is, you can go through rehablist.com, you can go to Homevestors, you can go to REI Club and look for local real estate club sites. And what you're doing is you're going to start to compile a list of properties. So let's suppose you were looking to do a direct mail campaign in Tampa. You go to Rehab List and you start maybe for the first, 5, 6 pages, you start noting where all these properties that these other investors, where they're listing the properties, what zip codes they're at. And all of a sudden, what will happen is you'll come up with a list of, say, 3, 4 zip codes that happen to show up all the time. So what does that mean? That means that those are the areas that investors are buying properties and they're attempting to sell them. And again, the other part of this data is also you start to gather other data. Like, for example, you could also make a note of the year the property was built, the square footage. And you start to see that, okay, well, most of these properties happen to be in these 5 or 6 zip codes. Most of them happen to be of this particular square footage. They happen to be from this age. And so all of a sudden now you have this data that now you can actually pinpoint the properties that you're going to go ahead and go after, because there's no sense in going after deals that you're not going to be able to sell in areas that people are not going to buy. Now, the problem with this approach is very unscientific, because it just depends on who happens to list property on Rehab List or any of these sites, and so you're not really getting accurate data. The most accurate way to do this is actually what it would be doing a zip code analysis. And I'm going to tell you, there's 2 sources that I get my list from. One is called RealQuest. Another one is called ListSource. And I'm going to the RealQuest, if you have a subscription to RealQuest, you can download. They allow you right now, as of the taping of this seminar, 5,000 records that you can download for free in the account. Do not go over 5,000 records, because they charge you $1 per record every record after that. So if you already have RealQuest, you can use RealQuest. If you don't have RealQuest, you can use listsource.com. ListSource, it's the same thing as RealQuest. The only difference is you don't need a subscription to ListSource. You can pay whatever records you want. All right? So what we do is we buy, and I put 3 months. We've been doing 6 months, but it just really depends. You get a list of absentee owners that bought a property in the last 3 months. Okay? Now what happens is that I say 3 months now because it ensures you're getting the most current activity. In other words, if you have a neighborhood that was hot 6 months ago, 8 months ago, and now nobody's buying there, then if you're getting data 6, 8 months back, then it's going to be inaccurate. If you get 3-month data, it's not going to be as much, but you're going to get a more accurate representation of where these sales are occurring. And so what we do is we sift and sort the data. And I have this on the site. There's actually video tutorials that show you exactly how to do this. But what we do is we find which of those zip codes appear the most. So we'll have a list, depending on the market, because it depends on your market. In my market, that list for 3-month sales might be 1,500, 2,000 names. Now, at 15 cents a name, which is what the average list source will charge you, what's that? I cannot do any calculations. I used to be an accountant, but without a calculator, I'm nothing. 15 cents times 2,000 names is $300, right? So $300 it would cost you to get that list. If you're in a smaller market, you may not spend as much. But in essence, what we do is we come up, and there's a program here, and I have video tutorials on the site as well, a program called DigDB, D-I-G-D-B. What it allows you to do is that Excel has a ton of features. A lot of those tend to be complicated. What this program does allows you to do a lot of the calculations that you would normally do with Excel, but do it in a much easier 1 or 2 clicks fashion. And I have a video tutorial to show you exactly how to do that. But essentially what we do is we get that list of zip codes, we analyze it, and we say, you know what, out of 15, 20 zip codes, we have 5 of them here where it looks like most investors are buying properties. And so those would be the ones that you would target first. And again, you just kind of work your way down the list. But what that does is it ensures that if you're gonna tie up a property, you're gonna put the property on the contract, then what's going to happen is just simply you're going to have a better chance of selling it because that's the neighborhoods where these guys are buying at. And again, you're going to find 5 to 10 zip codes depending on the metropolitan area where those investors are buying properties in. Generally, I tend to stay away from. We did this for another city outside area, and we did this. And the first zip code had a huge number of records, like double what anybody else did. When I find that, I tend not to use that first zip code. I later found out that zip code, there's a lot of abandoned properties. It's just really like the bottom of the barrel neighborhood. And so sometimes if you see that, you may want to just pay careful attention to it and say, well, let me find out more about what's happening in this particular zip code, the demographics. Why is it that this zip code has that many more sales? Other analysis tools that I use, Microsoft MapPoint. And again, I have video tutorials on this. What it allows you to do is that it allows you to, say, take an area, and you could actually map all those zip codes where they appear visually. So you'll be able to look at a map and say, okay, this zip code that I'm mailing is here geographically, this one is here. And it just allows you to get better acquainted with the neighborhoods. You can actually plot, as people call you can plot the properties, where the calls are coming from. The easiest thing to do would be to go to eBay and you could buy an older version. Don't buy the newest version. Buy like the 2004. It just works just as well. And again, it just allows you to see the data visually. And a great tool where you can analyze the calls. As you get calls, you do deals, you can actually plot them and see where these deals are coming from. And again, what I'm talking about here is having making data-driven decisions. When I was and I'm no longer doing that heavy marketing in South Florida. I'm doing it in other areas. But in South Florida, we had a list of about 20, 25 zip codes, where over time we kept track of all the deals we did, and we came to find out that the 80% of our deals came from about 7 zip codes. So how valuable would it be that if over time you kept track of this, and all of a sudden now, instead of mailing the 20 zip codes, now you narrow that down to the top 7 to 10 zip codes that you know where the deals are coming from, and you just target those and hit them more frequently and just do a better marketing for that. And so that's, again, this is a perfect example of the 80-20 rule. In that scenario, 80% of our deals were coming from a very small subset of those zip codes. So, and again, I'm trying to go fast because that way, hopefully I have some time left over between the two segments and I can answer questions that you may have. So downloading and sorting a list. So you have 3 choices, really. You can buy the list from list source, as I mentioned here, from RealQuest, or from the property appraiser's office. Now, list source, you'll pay anywhere between 10 to 20 cents a name per name for your records. Most of the time, it ends up being around 16 cents a name. Data is exactly the same from RealQuest. They get it from the exact same place. Actually, list source is owned by RealQuest, and the data is gotten from the public records. So it all comes from the same place. It just happens to be that they compile it and do their thing, and they charge you. They make a profit from that. Now, you don't need a subscription to them. You can just go on. You can go on today, log on, and be able to purchase a list right away. And again, you pay as you need. Now, RealQuest, you have a monthly subscription. So if you're using that for comps, then keep in mind is you have a free 5,000 records. Now, if you don't need the 5,000 records, let's suppose you're only planning on mailing 200, because remember, you get 5,000 every month. So why not, look ahead and say, you know what, over the period of the next 3 months, I'm going to mail X amount of mailings. I may not need the records now, but you know what, take 5,000 this month, download them. Then the next month, you could download another 5,000. A lot of people think that you have to re-download the records every time you do the direct mail. And most of the time, we use the same record anywhere between 8 months to a year. So, if I pull the data today for a particular market, I'm not going to re-pull that data again for another 8 months to a year sometimes, just because we're looking for the people that have owned the property the longest, So you don't really need to continually re-pull that list. And so it makes sense to use RealQuest if you already have this service for running your comps. And now this applies only if you get an unlimited county per month. In other words, you have a choice with RealQuest. If you're going to be using them for comps, you can buy national, where you can get comps anywhere in the country, but they charge you every time you pull a comp. Or you can get it where you pick a county and they give you unlimited access. If you do pick the county, they give you unlimited access. That's where you have the 5,000 records. And again, just when you sign up, because also the RealQuest, they continually make changes. So what I tell you today, if they make a change tomorrow, and now any new accounts are based on that change. So just confirm that. If you don't have RealQuest, or I don't know, because I have an old account. I've had it for 3 years. So you just confirm with them before you start pulling records what your limits are. Because again, if you pull 5,000 records at $1 a name, that could get pretty pricey. Yeah. Property appraisers. Sometimes if you're in a very small area, like Mike said, ListSource and RealQuest cover pretty much 90% of the U.S. There are certain areas where they don't have any coverage. You can't buy the list from them, so you're going to have to go to the property appraiser's office. Now, couple issues with that. Number one is that when you get into the system, I actually have a checklist where if you're going to be getting the data from the property appraiser's office, you've got to be very specific about what you ask them, because there's certain fields that you're going to need. Like, in other words, the data for if you ever look at a property in the tax assessor's office, they got everything: tax assessed value, year billed, all kinds of stuff you never even look at. But there's only certain things that we need. Obviously, we need the owner's name, the address, the mailing address, and other fields. But other than that, there's not a whole lot else that we need. And so we gotta be very specific about what we ask them for. So the problem is sometimes they require you. Sometimes you got to talk to them. Sometimes they allow you to buy. Like, you can give them a request and say, I want these specific records, this specific criteria. They pull the list and give it to you. Sometimes they want you to buy the entire county. The problem with that is a lot of times when they want you to buy the entire county, it's not in Excel. Now, in Excel, Excel allows you to keep 60. The old Excel, the limit was 60-something thousand records. So, most counties are more than that, and so it would be a problem to get it on Excel. Although the new Excel has a lot more records that could be placed in that spreadsheet. But a lot of times they give it to you in different data formats. And listen, I'm a bit of a tech guy. I know what I'm doing, and even with that, I have a hard time with. And so the best scenario, if you get for the property appraiser's office, you just say, listen, can I give you a specific criteria? Can you pull that criteria for the zip codes and not buy the entire database? And sometimes, like I said, this is the only choice because there are no other choices available, so you have to go with them. And again, you have to be very specific about the details you ask. I had a client of mine that actually got a list. It was in Kentucky. He got the list from the property appraiser's office. He just said, I want a list of absentee owners. They gave him just what they thought he wanted. He spent $1,600 for the list. In the end, he couldn't use the list. It didn't have any of the fields properly, nothing. We had to go back and request the list. They gave him a discount for the second request, but still he spent $1,600 unnecessarily on a list that if he would have asked for the right fields, he would have gotten the first time. So just in general, and again, in the system we cover all the fields, but in general, I mean, if you think about it, we want to know the owner, where they live, We want to know specifics about the property, and these are the most important things: the address, the square footage, the bedrooms and bath, the assessed value, and some of the other ones we go into the system. So again, the way the system is set up is actual video tutorials, and so you actually get to see me going through RealQuest and actually putting the reports together and downloading the records and take you through every step of the way. Now, most important field that you need is the sale date. Now, this is a little tricky because what happens is that, and this is pretty interesting, most of the people don't know this, and whenever you pull the data, most people say, well, I want properties that were 20 years, that the owner has lived, that has bought the property 20 years or older. So they put in on the criteria, okay, I want properties, 20 years or further back. So it seems obvious. It makes common sense. But what happens is a lot of times there's a gap between when the person bought the property and when the tax assessor actually started to compile data. So the tax assessor doesn't have a sale date for that person. They have nothing. And what happens is that when you request and you put that date and you request that date, guess what? You don't get that record. The records that have that field blank, you don't get at all. And the interesting thing is that most of the deals, when I looked at my record of deals, remember I did the analysis and I said, you know what, 80% of the deals came from 20% of these particular zip codes. Well, then when I re-looked at the data, I saw that, you know what, of those top 20% of where those deals came from, 80% came from the people that didn't have a sale date in the record. That means they've owned the property for such a long time that the county didn't know when they bought it. But when people do a normal search, they never pick those up. Now, the only negative with that is that whenever you pick a zip code, right, if you're going to go ahead and say, I want whatever the zip code you want, in order to get that record, you have to pull the entire zip code. So if that zip code has 1,500 absentee owners, and generally, so you have to pull the entire list. And again, I go through video tutorials showing you how to do that, but in concept, you pull the entire list, and then from that list, then you'll probably say, if you pull a list of 1,500 records, you might end up with a list of maybe 500 people that you're going to mail to, because you're not going to mail to the people that just bought the property, 6 months ago, a year. But you want to get to those people. And, it's a little bit more expensive to get that list because you have to buy all the records. But, I can tell you from experience, those are the people we bought the most properties from. Those are the people that we got the biggest checks from. So it is well worth it to do that. Now, so we wanted, let me see, I think I went over this here. And also too, whenever you're downloading data, let's suppose that you wanted to do a direct mail campaign, and you say, you know what, I want to just go all out and I want to do 20,000 records. I want to download 20,000 records so I can mail. If you're just starting out and you don't know any of this and you're trying to follow the system, don't do that. Say, I'm going to just download one zip code, download 1,000 records. Why? Because if you screw up that download and you downloaded 20,000 records and you spent all that money and then you did it wrong, guess what? Now you have to re-download all those records again. And believe me, I talk from experience because I've downloaded a list of 20, 30, 40,000 records and then came to find out that I messed up and I didn't do something right. And guess what? Now I have to repurchase that entire list. And so you want to try to eliminate those mistakes. And the only really way to do it is you can eliminate them through experience by doing it. But in the beginning, as you're doing it, just download a very small, just pick one zip code. Go through the process. I mean, a perfect thing for you guys to do would be is don't think of, oh, now I've got to mail 500,000 records in 2 years. No, just go home and pick a zip code. Do the analysis, and again, we go through this in the system. Just pick 1 or 2 zip codes, download that list, and send the mail out. And that's it. Go through the process one time. You're going to get so many insights from doing that. You're going to learn so much. And then the second and the third and the fourth time, it's just going to be easier and easier for you to do it. So again, most properties will show a sale date. The ones we want to go after, the ones that don't have the sale date, those are the best records. And unless you download the entire zip code, then you're not going to get them. Now, here's a caveat. Let's suppose that you're on a limited budget. You can't really spend that much money. And in order to do this the right way, you got to pull 5,000 records. But you don't want to spend 15 cents a name for 5,000 records. At that scenario, I would say, you know what, just go ahead and put in the sale date, knowing that you're not going to get these records. But if you don't have the money to spend to buy the entire list, then at least buy the records that you have, whatever you can get, and then go ahead and purchase the list. And again, we just talked about this. Just download one zip code, just test that out, and just to give you statistics, not every record is usable. So if I download a list of 20,000 records, I'm only going to mail to about 5,000 or 6,000 of those records. Not everybody's going to get mailed. A lot of those people, because what happens is, let's suppose that I have a list of 10,000 records. I'll start from the back to the front. So I'll start mailing to the people that have owned the property the longest. Like, for example, a lot of times I do no sale date to, say, 1970. Anybody who's bought the property, that owned the property since 1970, so only for 40 years. Then the next batch I'll do maybe anybody who's owned the property from 1970 to 1980. And I just work my way up, and usually I probably stop right around 10 years. Now, with the boom, a lot of these depending on your local area, sometimes you can fudge a little, like in South Florida, anything, before, I think the boom hit like 99, so sometimes we'd fudge a little and go as close to as 1998, as far as the date. But the other thing you have to think about is that if you're going to mail people that have owned the property, say, 10 years back, would you probably be better off just getting another list, another zip code, and going back and mailing those older sellers first? And so that's my advice is, if you can, you want to continue to mail those guys and those sellers that have owned the property for 10, 20, 30 years, excuse me, not 10, 20, for 20 plus years, because those are the ones that have deferred maintenance, they haven't updated the kitchen, the bath, they haven't done anything to the house, and those are the deals that Mike is talking about that you're going to be able to pick up at a substantial discount. And I think we talked about this actually. So we talked about inputting the sale date. If you're tight on the budget, you may be forced to input a sale date, so you may go back, say, 20 years or older when they last bought it, knowing you're not going to get those records, but as you do deals and you have more money to spend on direct mail, then you're going to be able to do that. Let's see. And so the benefit to doing this is just you're not going to have to download the entire zip code. So it's a judgment call. If you go in and you try to download the entire zip code and it's 5,000 records, and you say, you know what, I can't really do that right now, then you may be forced to put in a sale date in order to minimize the number of records and at least get started with something. So I think I went over this here. Extracting the best records, just pick a few zip codes. Don't give the system any criteria for sale date. You're going to get more records. And again, we just talked about this here. You have to just outweigh the cost versus benefit. It's just really a judgment call. For me, I'll go in and I'll just download the entire 25,000 records off that database, and I'll just have a huge spreadsheet and I'll work with it. But that's because I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mail a lot of stuff. But the thing I would do is just if you have that RealQuest account and you can do 5,000 records, even if you're not going to use them, just start downloading. You can download 5,000 records. They're good for 8 months to a year. Just every single month download them. By the time you get around to mailing a lot of records, 4 or 5 months down the line, you got 20,000 records anyway. Now you have the records that you needed. You didn't pay for them, or at least you paid for them because you have the subscription, but you didn't pay for them per record. And again, we want to target those the owners that have owned the property for 10 years or more. The criteria that we use is this, and again, this is all in the system, but we target houses built between 1940 and 1980. We don't target houses built in 1905, 1910, 1920. Now, the caveat is that if you're in an area where you have historic homes, where you have houses built in the 1900s, the 1800s, and they go for a lot of money, that's different. Most of the neighborhoods we work in, the houses that are built in 1900s, they're like shotgun houses. And like if you lean over to the house too much, the thing will fall over, So who's going to buy that house? The other thing is square footage over 900 square feet. A lot of times we get students, they're trying to do a comp and a house is 600 square feet. Nobody wants to buy a house that's 600 square feet. And on top of that, it's frame, and it's a shotgun house. Who wants that? So you got to think about what is the ideal property. So if you go over 900 square feet, you build between 1940 and 1980, you get decent, solid houses no matter where you're at.
Are you talking about the free and clear houses or the absentees?
The absentees.
How do you know they're absentee by looking at the list?
Well, what happens is that when you actually request the list from ListSource or RealQuest, they have a little box that you check that says, I want absentee owners. Okay, sorry about that. A little detail I glossed over there. Do I have to start over all the way from the... Yeah, I don't even know what slide I'm on, but I don't think you guys want me to do that. But that's a good question, so I apologize. So everything I'm talking about, okay. And again, we remove duplicates. Now, a lot of times, and I'm going to go into that, Mike Collins talked about the guys that own 10, 20, 15, 30 properties, 100 properties. We're not going to mail them 100 postcards. We remove the duplicates. We only send to one address. Normally, if the person has 10 properties, I look for the one that has the oldest, I mean that they've owned the oldest, not the one that they just bought recently, and I send one card to that person. Normally what ends up happening is if they have any property that they're interested in selling, they're going to call anyway. And again, I'm glossing over this, but we have a video tutorial that shows you exactly how to sift and sort the list and with Excel. It's not that difficult, and you can get all the duplicates sorted out very quickly within a matter of a couple minutes. As a matter of fact, I mean, I don't know what I was thinking, but when I first started, I didn't know how to use the formula, and I actually physically, eyed the spreadsheet. Whenever I'd catch somebody with properties, I would delete the records. It was actually just insane. I don't know why I even did that. But within a few minutes, you can remove all the duplicates in the spreadsheet. And again, we have the video tutorials and everything with the membership that you guys are going to get included with the seminar. Corporations versus private owners. We don't mail to corporations. I figured, you know what, if they're savvy enough to put in a corporation or trust, they're really too savvy for me. So we only target, but it's true. But it makes common sense. Only private owners. And again, if they're sophisticated enough to place in a corporation, they're just not our customer. And it's just a fact. Duplicates, we sort out the duplicates. We have a video tutorial for that. We only send one card regardless of the number of properties that they own. We send the card to the oldest property that they own first. List size. Again, we've chatted about this. If you download a list of 5,000 records, you're not going to mail to all those 5,000 records. Depending on the area, depending on the dynamics of that area, you may be reduced to 40 to 60% off that list. But that's perfectly okay. Because now, and I'm going to talk to you about this, because when we download that entire list of people that recently, of absentee owners in that particular area, we can use the list for two things. We can use the list, number one, to mail. So if you think about the list, you have on this end, we have the people that have owned the property the longest. On this end, we have the people that just bought 3 months ago. Well, here are our sellers. These are the people we're going to buy houses from. So we're going to target this part of the list. Now, a big subset of that list is going to go unused. But I'm going to go in a second because you can actually use the front part of that list, meaning the people that bought the property 3 to 6 months ago, and you can actually use that to build the buyer's list. And I'm going to go into that in a second. But as Mike talked about, you want the guys that that are buying. Right now, it's incredibly important for you to have a good buyer's list. And so the best buyers are not the guys that are searching through the newspaper that happen to see your ad and now they decide, hey, I want to see what I want to call Chris and just waste 30 minutes of his time asking questions, even though I don't want to buy a property. But we want the guys that are actually closing on deals, and I'm going to show you how we can get that from this list and build up really quite easily a buyer's list very fast. And again, it just depends on the county. A lot of this, we get rid of duplicates. That takes away a lot of the records. We don't target new sales, so we can't mail to them, at least for us to buy. We take away corporations. And so by the time all these things are done, by the time we remove the duplicates, by the time we don't consider the new sales, the corporations, then at that point, then we're going to end up with about 40% of the list. A quick tip is that whenever you're working with a list, suppose you buy a list from ListSource and you download the list, don't work off the original list. In other words, resave the list, under a different name and work off that. Because what happens is, especially when you're starting out, you're going to screw up. As you're trying to learn how to sift and sort this list, you're going to mess up. You're going to screw up the list. And if you use the original list, guess what? Now you got to go buy another list. But, and listen, all these things you talk about, remember in the beginning I talked about making mistakes? Okay? I made all these mistakes. And they cost money every time you make these mistakes. So again,
I have a question about corporations. Are you saying that you eliminate all the LLCs?
Yeah, when we're targeting sellers to buy properties from, I don't ever mail to any corporations.
You've not had a circumstance where that person wants to get out of their, the landowner business altogether?
We've tested it. We've done split tests where we actually mail to only the corporate owners, and just judging from the response, the demeanor, they were just too sophisticated. I mean, our ideal customer It's just that most of the people we buy houses from, they own one house. That's it. Only one house. That's their only house. The minute you get somebody that owns 3 or 4 houses, usually when they put in a corporation, they own more than one. So there's a correlation there. And then now if they put in a corporation, then, they're just too, I hate to say it, but they're just too smart for me. Yes, and we're going to go into that in a second, because conversely, those people we do want to target. We target not only the people that own it individually, but we also target the corporations as well. But when targeting for people that we want to buy properties from, and again, keep in mind is that all these things I'm talking about are things that I've learned from the testing. Because if you think about all the postcards and the direct mailings that I've done, I've tried all of these. I said, well, let me send to corporations, so let me send to the trust and see what happens there. And I tested and everything else and just found that they were kind of a waste of time. And again, you could test it yourself. But what I'm trying to do is say, you know what? You got this big thing called absentee owners and doing direct mail. How can we narrow this down and make it so that you have the best chance of success? Because there are a lot of mistakes you can make on the way to try to get this thing done. And I'm just trying to minimize it. Now, I'm not going to eliminate them, but I'm going to put you on a path. And again, a lot of the stuff is predicated on you spending the time to sit down and go through the videos. Because, and again, you may have to go through the videos a couple of times. But that's part of the process. Not everything is easy the first time, but as you do it more and more, it gets better and better. And again, start small. Don't try downloading 5,000 records if you've never done this. You're going to screw it up. Just take, I'm going to download one zip. Even if, say, you wanted to start with 5 zip codes, download each one at a time. If you screw up one, then you don't have to work. You could just re-download that one zip code versus if you got 5,000 records. Okay. So again, what happened? You're hurting? Too many slides? I actually lied. I actually 250, but I only said 140 because they wouldn't let me come on stage. So again, I covered some tidbits. Again, a lot of this stuff, doing the direct mail and do the campaigns, it's not like I can say here and say do this, this, and this. A lot of this stuff is video tutorials. You see me on ListSource, downloading the records, going through the whole process. So that's where really the learning is going to take place. But just understand, I just wanted to give you a brief overview of the system here. Now, handling incoming calls. Now, I differ a little bit on what Mike Collins does. Remember, Mike Collins said, go ahead and answer the call on the fly, to your cell phone so you can answer the calls live. I don't do that. I don't like doing that. My thing is that I don't like to put my cell phone, direct number, or any sort of marketing from the standpoint of the fact that, number one is I only want to talk to the most qualified people. Let's suppose if you have 50 people that call you, if you're taking those calls each one at a time, then what you're doing is you're giving equal importance to every single call that comes in. So how do you know, and ideally, what if you could say those 50 people identify, maybe the 15th person and the 27th person were really the highly most motivated, we're going to sell you the property at a great deal, but now you wasted your time talking to a whole bunch of other bozos you should have been talking to. So I want to talk to the most qualified people. So you don't need to talk to everybody. Now, in the beginning, when you're first starting out, you don't know, you want to get some practice talking to sellers, and you can talk to the idiots and the numbskulls. And I say that with a lot of endearment. I mean, they're great people, but sometimes they're crazy. I actually have them recorded, actually. They all go through a hotline, so every so often you get people that just amaze you at the type of vulgar language that could be used in a very short period of time. So anyway, you don't need to speak with everyone. A lot of times you can't speak to everybody. And the reason why is that when we do direct mail campaigns, you do a drop of 4,000 pieces, and you get 150 calls in the first 2 days. How are you going to answer those on your cell phone? By the time you're talking to one person, there's probably 3 or 4 that call you and left messages, right? The other thing, and I don't mention this on the slides, it's also what people expect. If somebody expects to call, I got a mosquito floating around. If somebody expects to call you and expects to reach somebody, and they call and nobody answers and they get a voicemail, they're going to hang up. But if the expectancy is that they are not going to get anybody, that they have to actually listen to a message and go through a process, then they're more likely to go through that process. You understand what I mean? So, and again, I'm going to cover this in a second, but you can't, when you do the direct mail and you got a ton of calls coming in, especially if you're doing any sort of volume, there's no way you can handle that many calls. And not everybody deserves a call back. Once you get used to talking to sellers, you know what you're doing. Like the ideal mailing campaign is you mail 5,000 records, 2 people call you, and they're great deals, and you buy both deals. So that doesn't happen. But you want to eliminate, those 99% of the people. You want to try to speak to as little as possible those people that call in. So the way we do it is we have the prospect follow a process where they automatically have to sort themselves out when they get our marketing piece. And the way we do it is via a 24-hour recorded message. So what happens is that, and I'm going to show you the cards in a second, and all this is in your system, and I give you all the scripts that you're going to put into the system to record your call, to record the hotlines. But my suggestion is you have a 24-hour message recording. And what happens is that they call into the system, and they listen to a 3 to 5 minute message. The 3 to 5 minute message tells them a little bit about what we do. And I'm going to go over just... And again, this is in the system, but I'm going to go over just in basics what the bullet points of that message are. And so my thing is, how can you handle 150 calls in 2 days? You can't unless you follow some sort of system in order to funnel these calls and really end up only really the most qualified people. So the message explains all the benefits of doing business with me. At the end, they'll leave a message, and then we call them back. We sift and sort the leads and only call the best ones. And then the most important thing is that so they leave a message. We get a certain number of messages. We go back through those. We sift and sort the leads, listen through the messages, figure out which ones are deals, and then we call the ones that are deals. Also, too, we call them when we want to. In other words, the way you should do it is you should be running your business where you have blocks of time set aside. Like, if you could be working on marketing, you block 2 hours out of the day just to work on implementing a system like this. And you might say, you know what? The way we do it is that, say, we know that sometimes we have to get people at night. So we may say, you know what? At 2 o'clock on Tuesdays and Thursdays, from 6 to 8, I'm going to try and call sellers that I haven't reached. But in essence, by doing it this way, you control when you're going to pick up the phone and call them versus, you're having dinner with your family and you spend a ton of money on mail and the cell phone is ringing. You're going to want to pick it up. But also too, you're not in the proper mental state. When you're talking to these people, you want to be sitting at your desk. You have all the information pulled. You're ready to talk to them. Not you're in the car, pick up the cell phone on the fly, and now you can have a conversation with the seller that potentially could be worth $15,000 to $20,000. But what? Because you're not prepared and you're not in the proper state of mind, and that could be a deal that you might lose. Yes.
What kind of information do you ask them to leave on?
I'm going to go into that in a second, actually. I'm going to go into it'll be in one of the upcoming slides here. So we tested various message lengths. We tested anywhere between a minute to as long as 7 to 10 minutes, and we found that 2 to 3 minutes was the maximum for us. Explains what we do. We tell them what we pay for closing costs. That's number one. So we tell them that we'll pay for all of their closing costs. The only costs that they would have to pay are either the property taxes and pay off their mortgage. We'll buy it with the tenants there, so they don't have to worry about them moving out, which is key. Now, it's a little bit of a fib because of the fact that we buy it whatever way we need to tell them that we're going to buy it so that they can sign the contract. Whether it's with their mother, whoever lives there, we don't care. If it's a deal, we want to tie it up. Because eventually who decides about the tenants is not me, it's not the owner, it's our buyer. So if you have a property you tied up and you tell the owner, I'm going to buy with the tenants there, no problem. I'll get them out at the closing, not an issue. And then your buyer says, I'm not going to buy the property with the tenants there, and he's your only buyer. Then guess what? You got to go back to the seller and say, we need those tenants out of here. And I'm going to cover some. I'm going to give you some tidbits on that because I feel it's important. But in essence, we tell them up front, we'll buy with the tenants there. You don't have to worry about it. And again, people are never giving. Nobody's ever giving you equity. Nobody's giving you anything. What they're doing is they're trading their equity for something else. And they're trading their equity for convenience. They're trading their equity for you taking care of a problem for them. And that's a mindset that I always have. We'll make the repairs after the closing so they don't have to worry about making any repairs. And so really that's what the message, that's the gist of the message. We'll pay for closing costs, we'll buy it with the tenants there, and we'll make all the repairs after the closing. So that's it. A couple other things that we mentioned, we'll tell them that we buy the property, we'll have the transaction handled by licensed and insured title agent in the local area so they can make sure that everything is being done right. And those are in the script, and when you log onto the system, you have all the scripts. So that's, but in essence, that's what we're telling them in the message. And so they listen to that message, and at the end, we ask them, you know what, if you're interested, then please leave your name, the address of the property you wish to sell, as well as any details about the property, including the bedrooms, baths, and also the asking price. And we ask them to leave the asking price. And 60, 70%, it depends on the market. Sometimes I've seen as high as 60, 70% compliant, where people will leave their price. And now, guess what? You have the address, you have the seller's information, and you have the price. And so now you can actually do the research before you call them, and then actually make a decision if you're even going to call them at all, because they left all this information. And so that's the whole premise of it. We want to kind of get them. Now, sometimes they don't really comply. Like, we get where they just don't leave a message. So sometimes we could alter the message and say, you know what? If you don't leave an asking price, then that's going to delay us getting back to you by 2 or 3 days. So it's better if you do go ahead and leave your asking price. But that's a judgment call you have to make, depending on the number of people that leave their information. And again, all these things, you got to think about the fact of this. Anything you do, a lot of times, you know, like any of the courses, my course, any course you buy, a lot of people at times get stuck because the course tells you to go in a particular path, and then all of a sudden there's a block there in the road, something just doesn't work out the way you expect it to, and then you get stuck, you think it doesn't work. What happens is a lot of times there's a curvy road, so you have to make adjustments, and you have to make judgment calls. And a lot of times, like I say, we make judgment calls and we deviate from the script depending on what the client tells us. The part about buying it with the tenants there came about because most of the people that we spoke with said that they had problems with tenants, and it became a recurring theme. So if you're in a local area where there's a recurring theme, maybe like, for example, in Tampa, aren't there like sinkholes here? Preston? Aren't there sinkholes? Anybody from Tampa? Like, don't you guys have sinkholes where like the ground gobbles up the house or something like that? People have that problem. So if that's a common problem, maybe you want to mention it in your script. So it also, you know, that's a problem that you have. So it just depends on your local area. So we told them that they could save thousands of dollars by us paying for their closing costs. And we buy the property with the tenants there. We make the repairs after we close, and the transaction is handled by a licensed and insured title agent. And also, too, what we do is that we tell them, if you want full retail value, then we're not your guys. It just depends. If you want, what we're trying to do is we're trying to try and get people. We want somebody that understands that they're going to have to sell at a discount. So very gingerly, we tell them that if you want full retail value, and we explain it. I'm not giving you the whole thing there with the message, but we explain to them that, you know what, most of the properties we buy need repairs, and as such, because the property needs repairs, then generally we need a discount on the property from the seller because of the price. And so if you want full retail value, then you are going to have to go ahead. Your best option is to go ahead and list it with an agent, wait the 4 to 6 months in order to get the property sold, perhaps, and go through this whole message with them, and the script says that. But in essence, then we're trying to explain to them that, hey, listen, you're going to have to be flexible on the price. And again, what we're trying to do is we're trying to sift and sort through all those people that call in, because and I'll show you some typical campaigns, but on a typical campaign that generated 150 calls, there were actually 500 people that called into the hotline and listened to the message. So we want to kind of, you know, we don't want 500 people. We only want to talk to the most qualified. And again, even with that number, you may go a step further. So again, you got to be a little bit intuitive. You got to make some judgment calls, and if your market merits you making a change to the script, then you do that. Tips on your recording. Practice your script several times so that you know it. Don't make it sound like you're reading. And then I would say, imagine just sitting at the kitchen table talking to a seller and explaining them all these things to them. That's the kind of conversation you want to have with them. And don't worry if you make mistakes. If you ever listen to any of my hotlines, I screw up all the time. I stutter. But I just leave it. Because if I were to do it perfect, number one, it would never be perfect. But I would spend an hour doing an imperfect script. And so if it's going to be a mistake anyway, why just not record it one time and just be done with it? So again, just make it conversational. And also, too, people sense it. If you're reading off a script, they're going to know it. You know, whereas if you're just picture yourself having a conversation with a seller and just chatting with them, then it's gonna come off better. And it makes you sound more real and personable. Also, always record the script before you send an email. You don't know how many times I've done it where I've done a direct mail campaign and I forget to record the script. And I'm wondering, like, nobody's called. Yeah, I wonder if the mail's behind or something. And then I noticed, because the hotline will tell you, like, there were, 400 people that tried to call and nobody got, they were like, you could tell, like, because the way the hotline works, you can tell when they dial in and then they go to the different extensions. But if they can't get to the extension, they get stuck at the beginning. And you could tell that, okay, we had 500 people call in, but nobody listened to this extension. And then you figure out that you didn't record it. And so before, again, see, I tell you, I make mistakes and they cost money. So record the script before you send out the mail. What happens is this. It's not that I forget. It's that I say, let me send out the mail. I'll put it on my schedule. Saturday morning, I'll sit down and I'll record the script. Saturday morning comes, I forget. Sunday, I'm going to do it Sunday. Monday comes, I'm going to do it Monday. Then Tuesday comes, I'm like, holy crap, nobody can listen to the extension because I didn't record it. So you do it with good intent. It's good intentions, but and again, people are trying to get to the message. And so again, also test it. Call the hotline yourself and make sure it's working. Test it. You record the hotline, go through the process, go through the extension number, listen to the message the entire way through. Make sure you can leave a message. Make sure that you get notified of that message. And again, I didn't go over in too much detail here, but with the hotlines that I recommend in the system, they send you can have the option of having an audio file of the message sent to you. So you get an email with the actual recording, and just make sure it works all the way through before you send out the mail, especially if you're doing a direct mail campaign. Recommendations for hotline, I have a couple on the side. My recommendation is Freedom Voice. They have a website called adtracker.net, and it's in the system. It's part of Freedom Voice. It costs you about $100 to get started with them. 4.5 cents per minute, which is very, very cheap. A lot of people ask me all the time about Pat Live, a live answering service, and get the person to answer the call live. But whenever you do that, think about this. The Pat Live answer, and I have nothing against Pat Live, but it's $1 a minute every time somebody calls in. How much is the bill for 500 people calling in at $1 a minute, staying on the phone for 6 minutes each person? 4.5 cents starts looking pretty good. So I recommend them, and very easy. You can get started with them right away. And any marketing, and I'm going to go into this in a second, but any marketing should have a tracking mechanism, and that's what you use. You use extension numbers, and I'm going to tell you about that in a second. Whenever I send anything you send should have an extension number. If you're sending out a letter, because you need to track it. If you're doing any sort of marketing, you need to figure out what's working, what's not working, eliminate what's working, and then focus on the stuff, and focus on making the stuff that's working, either do more of it or make it better. And so any part, like for example, if you put an ad in the paper, it should have some sort of tracking mechanism, so I had 10 people call in, and versus I send a postcard out and I had 15 people call in or 100 people call in. So you need to be able to measure that. The best way to do it is with a hotline. And the way the hotline works is that I think I have it's $100, and we have video tutorials and everything else on how to get started. But basically, you want to track all your marketing. You want to know what's working. You want to know where your leads are coming from at any given time, because you want to eliminate the waste. You want to focus on really what's working and make it better. And every piece of your marketing you should hold accountable. In other words, you're not looking to do image advertising. We're not a big corporation. We're looking to get a specific return on investment every time you do any sort of marketing, especially with direct mail. And the only way to do that is by tracking it. You need an ROI. You spent $100, you got this. And like Mike said, you spent $2,000 in a direct mail campaign, you got X amount of money. And that's how you can grow your business, because now from that point, then you can say, well, gee, and that's what I did with my business. Now, if I spend X amount of money and I made this, I got this many calls, this many number of sellers, tied up this number of properties, and I made this number of deals, now I can scale that. But if you're not tracking anything, then how are you going to make any decisions on your business? Lead follow-up. Try to get back. I try to get back with them within 24 hours. Sometimes that's not possible if it's on the weekend, or maybe if I'm not in the mood. Then, but try to get back with them in 24 hours. I separate it into A, B, and C. People ask me that all the time. A is a hot lead. They're asking a really great price. A tidbit: if somebody's really asking a great price, don't automatically say, okay, fine, I'll take it, because the first thought that's going to come into their mind is, oh, I sold it for too cheap. So always got to make them work for the price. Even if they're asking a good price, I'll say, you know what, sounds like the price I'm going to be able to work with you on. Maybe stretching a little bit, but maybe I might be able to work the numbers. So it sounds to me like if I could do something at that price, you feel comfortable selling the property. At least make them seem that there's a bit of a little bit of tug there. B leads is anything that didn't, if they don't leave enough information. Okay, a lot of times you get leads that don't leave any information at all. They don't follow directions. But a lot of those leads could be very good leads. We had a deal in Miami where the owner didn't leave a price. You can kind of tell from the demeanor of the voice. Sometimes a little arrogant. You kind of know that the person's not going to get called back. But this person had a peculiar voice that kind of led you to believe that maybe easier to work with, whatever. I couldn't get a hold of them. They didn't leave enough information. I didn't know what price they were asking. So I followed up. It took me 3 weeks of trying to get a hold of that person. Eventually spoke with them on the phone. With that deal, I bought and sold and made over $60-something thousand on that one deal. So had I taken that lead and said, well, they didn't leave any information. So they're always a suspect unless proven otherwise. And so if they don't leave enough information, you still want to make an attempt to try and figure out where they're at. Because sometimes they're finicky. People don't want to leave that information on the message. Just part of the game. And C leads is just asking too much money, a bit of attitude on the phone. The call. Well, if you can pay my price, I'll definitely sell it to you. Those generally don't get a call back. And what I do is I print all the information. I print comps. I print Google Maps. I use a program called PDF Factory. It's Peter, David, Frank, and then factory.com. What it is it allows you to take and you could print. If you're looking at RealQuest, you're looking at Google Maps, instead of printing it to your printer, you print it to this program, and it creates a PDF document, which now you can save on your computer. And then what I do is that you could do one of two things. You could either, if you want it on paper, then you can print all the leads. But if you have 150 leads, that's a lot of paper you're going to print out. Generally, what I do is I print everything to PDF Factory, and I create 3 folders on my computer, A, B, and C. As I talk to the leads, and what happens, interestingly enough, you might talk to somebody, you might hear a message, and you think, oh, that's an A lead. But after you listen to about 10 or 15 of those, you're like, oh, no, that's a B lead. That's an A lead. Because, the more people you talk to, the better handle you have on it. So I'll put them in different folders. And so that way now I have A, B, and C. And despite everything, if I have somebody that I'm dealing with that I think is a legitimate deal, that I want to try to put the deal together, I'll actually print that out. So in general, I may have like 10 leads printed, actual hard, paper, because I'm a scribbler. I like to scribble when I'm talking to somebody. And so if it's somebody good, then they get printed. But other than that, then there's no need to print them. The other thing that we do is that, as Mike said, you can work with realtors and give them the leads. If you do them this way and they're all printed, all the C leads, you can just send an email to the realtor with all the leads attached, and that's it. Very easy to do. Versus if you have them on paper, I in the past I've had to FedEx them. Let's see. So what about the leads that hang up? People always ask me all the time. We don't call them back. If they hung up, that means they've gone through the process. They listened to our message, and they decided that it wasn't for them. They decided that we're not one to help them, and so we're not going to call them back. We're not in the business of chasing people. We're in the business, we're not in the business of chasing people to do business with us. They listen to the message. They're not interested. Generally, 50%. It depends on the market. Depends on a lot of different things, but it could be anywhere between 40 to as much as 60% of the people will hang up, sometimes more. Don't be concerned about that. Now, if you send out, if 500 people call and 490 people hang up, that's a problem. But in general, anywhere between 40 to 60%, they're going to hang up and be okay with that. Not everybody is going to want to leave a message, and that's okay. That's perfectly okay with us. So your job as a marketer, is to translate value in terms of what your prospect can understand. Now, when I say that, I mean money terms. If they need money right away, then they're looking for somebody that can pay their house and pay cash for the property and close quickly. If they're in a time position, they need somebody that can close quickly. Savings of hassles or terms, emotional terms. And so you have to be understanding of and it really gets down to the point of, believe it or not, I mean, talking to customers is a very insightful thing because, when you're talking to somebody, not only talk to them from the perspective of figuring out if it's a deal for you or not, but you should also try and get inside of your customer's shoes, understand what they're going through. Right now? Is it an hour and a half already? Oh my goodness. Just give me 5 more minutes. Actually, I'm almost done. So a lot of times, like for example, and you'll see this on the system, we personalize all the cards. Like these are exact postcards. You'll have them in the system and everything, but we personalize with the owner, property, and we try to make it so that, and believe it or not, whenever you personalize it, it increases response 33%. A lot of the cards that we do, also, we tell them a personal story. This one, for example, tells them that I recently sold 2 properties to some long-term tenants, and if I don't buy another property with the proceeds, then I'm going to have to pay taxes on that money next year. Yes?
Do you manually personalize those, or do you have an automated way of?
No, I have an automated way of doing that, actually. I'm gonna chat about that. So all that is done, and so again, rather than sending them a house to say we buy houses cash like everybody else does, when you send in this, that's what causes people to respond in such large numbers. And we also do personal stories. We reference other postcards. We've gotten you've gotten a couple of my cards in the past, perhaps have never spoken on the phone, and so again, all these cards are in the system. But if you look at them, they look very different than what normal people send out. The normal we buy houses cards cash and the reason that's the reason why the response rate is that good, because they look different. They look different than anything else they're getting. Sometimes I go too far. This is one that I actually don't have in the system. If you want it, I can give it to you. But I actually told them that the closing date was actually scheduled already. So a lot of angry people called off of that card. Return address. See, that it clicked, right? They got threatened by they wanted to call the state attorney's office and a lot of other stuff. So, but again, by testing, I'm always testing. We use mailboxes, etc. Especially if you're doing a local area. Don't put your home address. A lot of these people, they're crazy. You don't want them showing up at your house. Really, I'm not joking. These guys, you see here the messages that I get from these people. It's scary. So I use the mailboxes, etc. All the return mail goes there. They can't find me. They've shown up to the mailboxes, etc. And you got to let them know. They don't disclose who you are, but I wouldn't want some of those people showing up at my door. A lot of crazy sellers out there, especially when you don't take them off your mailing list. So, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and save the free and clear owners. I'm going to stop here because I know we got to take a break.